Something interesting is quietly unfolding inside the Philadelphia Eagles, and if you really pay attention to the details that are coming out of this offseason, you start to realize this front office is operating on a completely different level than most teams in the league. This isn't just about signing players or filling gaps on the roster. This is about long-term control, financial flexibility, and building a system that keeps this team competitive year after year without collapsing under pressure. Let's start with something that might shock a lot of fans. There's been a lot of talk around A.J. Brown and what his contract means for the Eagles moving forward. Most people hear the phrase dead money and immediately panic, especially when numbers like $40 million get thrown around. But here's what's not being talked about enough. If the Eagles ever made the difficult decision to move on from A.J. Brown, the long-term financial impact is actually far more manageable than it seems at first glance. Yes, a pre-June 1st trade would come with a massive dead cap hit, but if you look beyond that initial number, the Eagles would actually create significant savings in future seasons. We're talking about avoiding over $130 million in cap charges across 2027, 2028, and 2029. On top of that, they would save more than $100 million in real cash spending, including nearly $30 million in 2026 alone. That's a huge distinction that many fans overlook. Salary cap and cash spending are not the same thing, and smart organizations like this one know exactly how to balance both. Now let's be clear, moving on from A.J. Brown would be painful. He's arguably the best wide receiver this franchise has ever had. But the key point here is flexibility. This front office, led by Howie Roseman, has built a system where even the toughest decisions don't cripple the future of the team. That's not luck, that's planning. And that brings us to the next major point. The Eagles have actually increased their cap space during free agency. Think about that for a second. Most teams spend money and watch their cap shrink. Philadelphia entered free agency with around $12 million in space. Now, they're sitting at nearly $33 million, ranking among the top teams in the league. How is that even possible? It comes down to strategy. Void years, short-term deals, restructures. These are the tools Howie Roseman uses better than anyone else. Players are signed in ways that keep the immediate cap hit low, while pushing financial commitments into the future when the salary cap is expected to rise. It's a calculated bet on the continued growth of the NFL, and so far, it's working perfectly. Even players on one-year deals are structured creatively. Contracts are designed to give flexibility, not limit it. And that's why this team continues to operate with room to maneuver while still adding talent. Now look ahead, and it gets even more interesting. The Eagles are projected to have around $77 million in cap space in 2027. That's already a strong number, and if history tells us anything, it's that Roseman will find ways to increase that even further. By 2028, early projections show around $100 million in space. And remember, that's before any adjustments, restructures, or extensions are made. But here's where the bigger picture really comes into focus. One of the biggest challenges for successful teams is what happens after winning or contending. You lose players. It happened after the Super Bowl run, and it happened again after another strong season. Key contributors leave because they priced themselves out of your system. However, next offseason looks very different. Right now, there simply aren't many marquee players set to hit free agency. That means fewer major losses, more roster stability, and a stronger foundation going into the next season. Yes, there are some names to watch, and a few players who could command big money if they perform well, but overall, this is a much more controlled situation compared to previous years, and that's not by accident either. Many of the players brought in recently are on one-year deals. That gives the Eagles maximum flexibility. They can evaluate talent, adjust the roster, and avoid long-term financial risk all at the same time. When you step back and look at everything, the cap growth, the contract structures, the future flexibility, and the reduced risk of losing key players next year, it becomes clear that this isn't just a good offseason. This is a carefully executed plan that positions the Eagles to stay competitive for the long haul. So now the real question becomes this: are the Eagles quietly building one of the most sustainable contenders in the NFL? And is this strategy strong enough to keep them at the top for years to come? What do you think about the way this front office is handling everything right now? And And when you really start connecting all these dots, it becomes even clearer that what the Philadelphia Eagles are doing right now isn't just smart. It's calculated to give them an edge that most teams simply don't have. Because think about it from a bigger perspective. In today's NFL, the hardest thing to maintain isn't talent, it's sustainability. Teams can build a contender for 1 or 2 seasons, but keeping that window open without collapsing financially or losing half your core roster, that's where most organizations fail. And that's exactly where this front office is separating itself. Take a closer look at how Howie Roseman is handling roster turnover. In previous years, after deep playoff runs and a Super Bowl win, the Eagles were forced to watch key contributors walk away in free agency. It hurt the depth, it forced quick adjustments, and at times it created holes that weren't easy to fill immediately. But instead of reacting emotionally to those losses, Roseman adapted the entire structure of how this team is built. Now, instead of locking themselves into long-term deals with every contributor, the Eagles are rotating talent through short-term contracts, especially with veterans and external additions. That means every single offseason becomes an opportunity rather than a problem. If a player performs well, you can reassess. If not, you move on with zero long-term damage. And this is where things get even more interesting for the future of this roster. There are key young players already on this team who are going to command massive contracts soon. That's inevitable. And instead of putting themselves in a position where they can't afford to keep their core, the Eagles are preparing for that moment right now. They are clearing future space, maintaining flexibility, and making sure that when it's time to pay their homegrown stars, they'll be ready. At the same time, they're avoiding a situation where too many big contracts hit at once. That balance is incredibly difficult to achieve, but it's exactly what keeps championship windows open longer than expected. And don't overlook how important the one-year deals are in all of this. Players coming in on short-term contracts create competition, urgency, and flexibility. It also means the Eagles are constantly evaluating, constantly refreshing the roster without committing to long-term risk. Names like Andy Dalton and other recent additions are perfect examples of how this strategy works. They can contribute now, but they don't tie the team down later. Even positions that could become concerns, like tight end with Dallas Goedert potentially hitting free agency, are already being anticipated. The idea isn't to react when a problem appears, it's to prevent the problem from ever becoming critical. Drafting ahead of need, structuring contracts with foresight, and always keeping an exit strategy, that's the pattern you're seeing here. And when you combine that with the financial flexibility we talked about earlier, the growing cap space, the ability to restructure deals, the projected increases in the league's salary cap, you start to see why this team isn't boxed into any one direction. They can pivot, they can be aggressive, they can rebuild certain areas without tearing everything down. That's a rare position to be in. So while a lot of the attention around the league is focused on big signings, flashy moves, and headline-grabbing trades, what the Eagles are doing is much more subtle, and arguably much more dangerous for the rest of the NFL. They are building a system that can absorb change without losing identity. And if this continues to play out the way it's been set up, this isn't just about competing next season. This is about extending the window for as long as possible, keeping the roster fresh, and staying one step ahead of the financial curve every single year. Now imagine this scenario. The young core develops the way the organization expects. The cap continues to rise, and the Eagles maintain this level of flexibility. You're looking at a team that doesn't just contend, but one that reloads without ever fully resetting. That's how dynasties are built in the modern NFL. So as all of this unfolds, and as more of these moves start to make sense over time, the question isn't just whether the Eagles are making the right decisions right now. It's whether the rest of the league is even keeping up with what they're building behind the scenes. If you've made it this far, drop your take below. Do you think this long-term strategy actually puts the Eagles ahead of everyone else? Or is there a hidden risk that could backfire down the line? And there's one more layer to this that a lot of people still aren't talking about enough, and it might be the most important piece of all when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles staying competitive long-term. This strategy doesn't just protect the team financially, it actually creates internal pressure in the best way possible. When you build a roster filled with short-term deals, flexible contracts, and future opportunities, every single player knows they're constantly being evaluated. Nothing is guaranteed. That kind of environment raises the level of competition across the entire locker room. You're not just relying on stars to carry the team. You're building depth that's hungry, players who are motivated to earn their next contract, whether it's in Philadelphia or somewhere else. And that urgency translates directly onto the field. At the same time, the core of the team, the players that truly matter long term, are being positioned to get paid when the time is right. That balance between short-term hunger and long-term investment is extremely difficult to manage, but it's exactly what Howie Roseman has been setting up behind the scenes. And here's where things could really take off. If the Eagles hit on their upcoming draft classes the same way they've done in recent years, this entire system becomes even more powerful. Young, cheap talent combined with smart veteran rotation and elite cap management. That's the formula that keeps teams not just relevant, but consistently dangerous. Because while other teams are forced into tough decisions, cutting key players or restructuring deals just to survive under the cap, the Eagles are operating from a position of control. They're not reacting, they're dictating, and that's the biggest difference. So moving forward, every move you see is whether it's a one-year signing, a surprising restructure, or even a decision involving a big-name player. It's all part of a much bigger picture. A picture where the goal isn't just to win now, but to make sure the window never fully closes. And if that plan fully comes together, the rest of the league might be dealing with this version of the Eagles for a lot longer than they expect. So now I want to hear from you. Does this approach make you more confident in the future of this team? Or do you think there's still a move missing that could take them to another level? And the more you sit with all of this, the more you start to realize that what the Philadelphia Eagles are building isn't just about roster construction. It's about control over every possible outcome. Because think about how rare that is in the NFL. Most teams are constantly reacting to pressure. A player breaks out and suddenly you're forced to overpay. A bad contract hits your cap, and now you're restructuring deals just to stay afloat. A deep playoff run leads to mass departures, and you're scrambling to replace production. That cycle repeats over and over again across the league, but here the Eagles are trying to break that cycle completely. With the way Howie Roseman is structuring contracts, planning future cap space, and managing roster turnover, this team is putting itself in a position where no single event can derail everything. Lose a player? There's a plan. Need to extend a star? There's space. Want to be aggressive in a specific offseason? The flexibility is already there. That's not normal. That's intentional. And it also changes how you should look at every move they make from this point forward. A quiet signing isn't just depth. It's leverage. A one-year deal isn't just temporary. It's optionality. Even decisions that might seem controversial on the surface could actually be part of maintaining that long-term balance. This is why when conversations come up about players like A.J. Brown or potential future extensions for younger stars, the Eagles aren't backed into a corner emotionally or financially. They've built a system where they can make decisions based on what's best for the team as a whole, not out of desperation, and that's where this could separate them even further. Because if you combine smart financial planning with strong drafting, and then layer in a culture where competition is constant and expectations are high, you start creating something that's very difficult to disrupt. Even when things don't go perfectly, the foundation holds. That's how you avoid rebuilds. That's how you stay relevant year after year. And more importantly, that's how you give yourself multiple chances to win, instead of going all in once and hoping everything works out. So as we look ahead, don't just focus on the obvious moves. Don't just look at who's starting or who's leaving. Pay attention to the structure behind everything, because that's where the real story is unfolding. If this plan continues to be executed the way it has so far, the Eagles won't just be chasing another championship. They'll be